I think you have a team at your fund that's really the people you like, that are the experts in your field, that you feel are super smart and excellent at what they're doing. And via DeepSense, you've got 2,200 more by your side as needed to deep dive into the tech that you're looking at. And it just gives you kind of an extra weapon in your arsenal that other investors might not have, that could be pivotal. And from like an impact perspective for us, what DeepSense does and why we wanted to do it is it avoids money flowing to the wrong things, and it helps money flow to the right things. And that's really what we're trying to enable. And that's kind of the mission statement of DeepSense.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Climate Tech 360, where we connect with diverse voices in the climate sector to make informed choices in supporting the future of climate tech. I'm your host, Samia, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Stefan Quist. Stefan is an expert in energy systems, power grids, and nuclear energy. He is trained in mechanical engineering from the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden, and he completed his doctorate in nuclear engineering at UC Berkeley, where he invented the autonomous reactivity control system during his studies. Stefan has led research and taught courses in topics relating to energy systems, power grids, and nuclear energy at UC Berkeley, MIT, Los Alamos National Laboratory, Uppsala University, Warsaw University of Technology, and many other institutions worldwide. His published research spans more than 50 scientific journal publications, which have been cited more than 1,000 times. He is the co-author of the book A Bright Future on Future Energy Strategies, which has been translated into 7 languages. He was a country representative to technical working groups of the International Atomic Energy Agency for Sweden during a number of years and led a 15-country coordinated research program on behalf of the agency as the elected study chair. Stefan founded the technology consultancy Qualified Carbon, or QC, in 2017. QC is now present in 6 countries and employs 15 people full-time, all senior PhD-level experts. In Sweden, Stefan and QC has, for the past 5 years, led the most comprehensive studies on Sweden's future power system conducted on behalf of the Confederation of the Swedish Enterprise. Stefan has also co-founded and co-leads, alongside Baroness Bryony Worthington, the Coal Repower Program, an international nonprofit initiative which, since 2019, has been active in 7 countries working to convert coal power plants and other fossil fuel assets into clean energy centers. Stefan also helps manage the investments of a leading family office in the climate impact space and serves on the advisory board of 6 companies. For many years, Stefan has served as an expert to venture capital investors, assisting with technology due diligence, primarily focused on the energy space and with a particular expertise in nuclear. Born out of this experience, Stefan co-founded the technology due diligence provider and expert network DeepSense. In this episode, we talk specifically about DeepSense and how investors can use the expert network to have an edge in their science tech due diligence. I'm an advisor for DeepSense, and the fund where I previously worked has used them, so I'm excited to share their process with you and explore how they can support you as an investor or as a founder. And if you're interested in learning more, you can set up a free one-to-one call with Stefan or one of his team members in the link in the show notes. And now, on to the episode. Hi, Stefan. Welcome to the podcast. And I note that you have a microphone, so you're obviously very well versed in the podcast world.
Oh, yeah. I dabble now and then whenever I feel like I might have something interesting to say.
We think you have a lot of interesting things to say. So thank you for being here in August. I know that the rest of Europe is off leading into this last week. So really appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Thank you very much for having me, Samia. And I'm just back from vacation myself. So my brain is still rebooting kind of off of that vacation. So apologies if I'm slower than I should be.
I'd highly doubt that. Well, let's jump right in. I would love to hear you talk a little bit about how DeepSense defines science tech risk, because I feel like this is the basis for everything that you talk about. So tell me about what science tech risk is, and if you could give me some examples.
Yeah, I mean, it's a broad term. When we talk about risk now, it's not risk in the sense that someone's going to get hurt or there's a risk to people's lives. It's more of a financial risk that investors take in making a bet on someone or, an entity that's developing technology. And there's obviously always risk in investment, especially venture capital investment in various ways. But there's a risk that whenever you're investing, especially if you're in any venture stage, the technology isn't yet what it's supposed to be. It might be that someone just came up with an idea, they haven't even tested it yet, if it's a really early stage, or they have kind of a benchtop experiment that they're then going to scale, and it's going to get better and more efficient and cheaper and all of this. And there's an inherent risk in all of these kind of projections going into the future not panning out. Essentially, that's on the highest level. Science risk is obviously kind of connected science risks of this technology not being as unique as maybe it's presented as, the moat to others, the defensibility of IP, and all of these things. All of these are kind of connected science/technology risks that we kind of try to focus on figuring out on behalf of investors.
Great. And how do you do that exactly?
So the origins of DeepSense, the idea sprung out of me acting as an expert, kind of a tech expert DD person for venture capital investors, and realizing very quickly, I'm not competent other than in a very, very slim vertical. If even then, the very slim thing that I actually know enough about to really be confident in my opinions about, if I look hard enough at. As soon as it veers out of my area of absolute expertise that I feel like I'm good at, I start to get a little bit nervous that I don't really know this well enough. And what we kind of I took a hard look at what the venture capital investors that I work with had on their plate. And it's just very, very complicated. There's it's a wide array of technologies. And even inside of those wide array of technologies that you really need to find an expert that really understands that, to really understand what we talked about now, science and tech risk, but also the potential of the technology and the quality of the team and all. And what we're essentially trying to do is provide investors and actually startups now as well with experts suitable to do that. Well, not some kind of generic expert that feels like they're kind of good at various things, but really the deepest down, the expert you can find in a certain subtopic.
Yeah. And your expertise is nuclear physics. So were you being engaged for things that were outside of that realm by funds?
Yes. And quite frequently I had to say, I know a little bit, I understand math and chemistry and physics to some extent, but, you really should find someone who really understands this. And I could, from understanding the basics, probably help you find that. And that's kind of how DeepSense, the idea of DeepSense came about. Say there are these expert networks, there's TGIS and GLG and these things where you can find people and you can have a phone call with them and all of that. There was kind of a missing component there in someone kind of bespoke finding the right experts to talk to on tech specifically. And so I think you need kind of a tech person to find the other tech people, to have the instinct to say, like, a generic knowledgeable person isn't good enough here. We need someone who really understands the deep details here and know how to find those people.
So how does this work? If I'm an early stage fund, I have an intro call with you. You tell me a little bit about DeepSense, and then what? And let's just say it's something on the simpler side. Let's stay away from nuclear physics, but like something like wastewater to energy, where the technology isn't uber complicated. Let's say I get a deck from a startup and I send it to you and I say, I want an expert to vet this technology for me. What happens next?
Yeah, so typically it depends on how early stage the startup is. If it's really, really early, kind of pre-seed, maybe there is only a deck.
Yeah.
And that deck will have 4 or 5 slides that have some technical content that says obviously we're going to save the world and our team is the best in the world and we have great advisors. But we'll skip over those for the moment and we'll go to the tech portion of that slide deck. If it's a little bit later, there's probably a data room. There's probably some kind of technical white paper. Maybe there's a journal publication by some scientists involved. Maybe there's a patent application or something. So we'd collect all of what is described in writing and figures about the technology itself. And we'd recommend before anything else that an expert or two have a look at that and read up on that, understand all of that before anything else happens. And then what comes out of that is not an expert, recommended by us saying, hey, investor, this is fantastic, you should invest, or this is terrible, run away. It's more what usually comes out of that material review on an early stage is they're not really explaining this step really well. They're taking this experiment that's on a benchtop in a university to a container to a factory in 3 years. TRL is going from 2 to 8. Efficiency is going from 30% to 40%, whatever. They're not really explaining how they're doing that really well. They're not explaining this number really well. They're not. So what comes out of it is not great invest or terrible run away. Sometimes terrible run away, to be honest, but never great invest. But rather, we need to dig in. They need to explain how they're thinking about this more. They need to provide more color on this topic, typically about scale up, typically about defending numbers that look a bit, obviously numbers are supposed to look better than incumbents and competitors, but they have to really motivate why, both technical numbers and cost numbers. So what comes out of that material review is like a list from the expert of these things need to be dug down deeper in and explained better. And we typically recommend after that, which doesn't need to take a long time, but if there's not that much material, it doesn't take that long, to have a call. And the startup would then put there could be CTO, CSO, head of engineering, whoever is technically responsible. And typically, if it's an early stage startup, the CEO is there too to kind of hold the hand and control things and see that things are working out well. And we'd have the expert in the room and we'd also have the investor in the room, a virtual room usually. And we'd skip this entire kind of the startup pitching, how climate is important and all of these things. And we just jump, since they've already read up on the material, directly into a discussion around these technical topics. The investor is in the call, but after a few minutes, it's typically very difficult to follow the discussion. So they won't be understanding the details of the discussion. But what it gives the investor, even in the call, is very, very important, which is kind of a smell test. So you kind of get a feeling for, is the startup people honestly answering, honestly acknowledging, we don't know yet, but we'll figure out, or yeah, that's a great point. We'll have to, or are they waffling around, avoiding the questions, getting hostile back at the expert? So you get a very good sense, even if you don't understand the details of the conversation, like the confidence of the startup, the people the startup put in the room on what they're doing. And after that, obviously, the expert's opinions, written and verbally, on what they're hearing and what needs to be drilled down more. So I would say, like, if it's an early stage engagement, only a few hours of this is, extremely valuable. It won't give you full confidence that all of this will work out during the next 5 years of tech trajectory of that company, but it will, at minimum, avoid mistakes. It will sniff out kind of less suitable investments quite easily.
Okay, so before I ask you the next question, I just want to anecdotally mention that when I was working at my previous fund, we worked with you guys and it was a nuclear deal and I wasn't on that deal. It wasn't my deal, but I heard that when they jumped on the due diligence call, the founder wasn't expecting it, but it was like us, an investor and two world-renowned nuclear physicists. And I think that that can be quite daunting, but I actually think that the founders were really excited and felt very privileged to be able to have that interactions.
And that kind of reaction for me would be a huge green flag. They're not scared. They're excited to show what they're doing, excited to explain it. They're not trying to hide things. They're not trying to waffle around. So that you get a sense, even if the nuclear physics discussion is a bit, over your head as an investor, if you're not a nuclear physicist, you still get a very good sense for kind of the confidence and the attitude of the people involved, which is extremely important, obviously.
Yeah. So what happens after that call? So presumably there's an initial call with the founders and then investors, just like the early call talking about the company where they do the pitch. And then on the investor side, we dig more into the science. We engage experts from DeepSense. And when we're engaging, because I've used GLG before, I've used GLG a really long time ago. I don't know if things have changed, but the way that we used to be able to do it is you could search for a topic and then you could look people up. With DeepSense, do we come to you with the pitch and then you give us a list of people that might be relevant and then we pick which ones?
Exactly. Yeah. So we get enough material to understand what the subject matter is and what topics are interesting and what are key questions, even if the investor already has key questions. And we can match that up, but we wouldn't match it up to a single person unless it happens to be something so specific we only have a single person. But typically we'll say, these are the 3 people we think are most suitable. And we would also, there's typically at different levels of seniority. So you have a specific budget that you can spend on early stage or late stage, whatever it is, DD, tech DD. And sometimes you want the head of a department at MIT or Harvard that's in contention for a Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be the same hourly rate as a postdoc that's really good and really active and young in the field. So there's a bit of a menu in terms of experience. All of them obviously very technically capable, but a bit of menu in terms of experience and associated cost. And so you would pick 1 or 2 of those, probably, usually.
And I would imagine also some people are less accessible. So if you're going on a shortened time frame, and let's just say with some deals, you might have 2 months to do due diligence and they're not in a hurry. They came to you first. They just started the process. But with others, maybe you got to the deal sort of as it's closing. They already have a lead. They want to sort of wrap up in a month or so. And so you want to get an expert pretty quickly. So what is that time frame like? And what's the range?
Yes, it's not necessarily a trend in availability because they put their kind of hourly rates at a level where they are more or less not that differently available, to be honest.
Okay.
So
they
would take it at night or whatever, but they get well paid if they're very senior. We have our record is the same afternoon. So I think a request came in around lunch and by 4 p.m. we completed. That's special. I mean, I'm not going to guarantee that ever happening again. But we've never had a turnaround time more than a week. So typically we are able to, sometimes we are impressed, very impressed by the venture capital community finding something, even now, it's very rare now, but something that we don't have experts for, we haven't looked at before. And then we, on our own cost, because we want to cover everything that's of interest, we'll find experts, we'll source new experts. And then it's more difficult to guarantee a time. But most of the time these days, we have several good experts available, and a turnaround time of a week for venture capital is quite a lot requested.
Yeah.
There's often time pressure, especially if it's kind of a final, like we're kind of very interested to do the investment. We really need some ticking of the box here at the end before committing. That timeline for that might be very stressful. So, and we're trying to kind of adapt to the life of venture capital, both in terms of how much tech DD needs to cost, but also how long it needs to take.
And are you able to have them sign exclusivity agreements? I would think that you wouldn't want to do that because you should be able to share your knowledge freely with the community, and you shouldn't necessarily have to sign exclusivity with a specific person, because that doesn't really benefit the overall climate tech community. But let's just say there's a fund and they want to exclusively sign someone to do DD. Can you do that?
On a specific case, that could be done. It's very rarely done because the VC community is very collaborative in a sense. We've had more of the case that people are asking us, is it okay we share this with our co-investors, or we have this syndicate and we want to share this? And we're typically okay with that. So it's more in the other direction rather than someone wanting to keep it for themselves. And I guess this is quite a bit unique to the kind of climate impact VC community that invests not in software primarily, but more like hardware impact. They're a very collaborative bunch. They go to the same conferences, they're all friends, they want to co-invest, and they want to share their DD a lot of times.
Yeah, I can't speak to the US market, but in Europe, it's incredibly collaborative. And I think we're all trying to figure it out together. So it takes about a week. After that week, you do this second DD call, which effectively is just a science DD call with maybe 1 or 2 experts, an investor, and the founding team. And then after that, what happens? Do the investors get a report? Do they typically do like a follow-on call for the science DD, or does it usually end there?
So this is really depending on the ticket size and the stage. So if it's a really small investment and it's a really early stage company, which is typically connected to each other, you might be happy, or you might have spent your budget doing this kind of just this iteration, just this 3-4 hours, 1 or 2 experts. material review call and then a written report document stating what the expert feels like, as well as talking to the expert afterwards. That might be it, that you might have used up whatever allotted budget you could have for a small ticket in an early stage. If this was, you're going to invest 15 million in a Series A, that would just be the kind of kickoff meeting for a much deeper, bigger, longer tech DD using several experts. And you probably would have much more than a week to try to complete that. Then you would be talking, months. So it really depends. If it's really early, yeah, that might be it. If it's kind of in between, what you would do is you would take the feedback from the expert and say, okay, they explained this and this and this that we had from the material route satisfactorily. It's been resolved. They don't have all the answers, but they're honest, they're truthful, they know what challenges are ahead. But these two, it's really still very unclear from this, and we need to dig down more. And then the investor can take that recommendation on or not. But sometimes if it's a bigger ticket and not super early stage, you want more confidence, especially if it's a critical, thing for that technology or for that development pathway. Then you would dig down and you would spend a few more hours on that topic alone to really sort it out. And you would get not only confidence on that one topic, but more confidence on how that team interacts with the expert. And so we're not that prescriptive in, there are like check the boxes DD offering we do, but what I'm describing here is more of a kind of see where it takes you kind of process, which we also do a lot and a lot of investors enjoy.
Okay, so let's say if it's an early stage fund, you have that one call maybe and you get some output like a report. If it's a later stage fund or like A to C, then you have many follow-up calls and you're continuing to work with the experts. Let's say your science tech due diligence is done and you're comfortable with the technology. What we would then do as investors, and we're doing it side by side, but another reason that we would pass on a potential investment opportunity is because the unit cost economics doesn't make sense. So is there something around the unit cost economics that you also provide?
Yes, it's an excellent question because we do tech due diligence, but it's really hard to ring fence just tech.
Yeah.
Right? Everything spills over into everything else. So for instance, you could vet the chemistry of a process or the efficiency of something you're producing. But then you're saying, okay, but this is just a tiny thing. What will happen when we scale it up by a factor of 100? And then you're not only doing tech due diligence, you're also doing scale up, industrialization DD, and kind of coupled to that market size DD and manufacturability and supply chain and out. So it kind of expands also in every direction, essentially. So what has been started to happen for us is we either find kind of the golden nugget expert that has some kind of market expertise, some industry expertise that knows the commercial side and the tech side, but that's rare. It's rare to find all of that in a single human being, especially one with no conflicts of interest that can take it on. So what typically happens in a lot of cases now is we have two experts, one who is very deep down in the tech, understands every single detail, and another one which has whatever less techy but more market side expertise that's required, either scale up industrialization or assessing the size of the market or the unit economics. So obviously, if you have a completely new idea, that's a bit difficult. But a lot of the startups today are trying to disrupt an existing industry. They're trying to make a better product in an existing industry where there's already products out there. And one thing that's very obvious to do is you have to find someone who understands the cost structure of the incumbent technology and know where the costs are coming from, and then map that to this new invention, this new thing that someone's bringing out to say, why are you cheaper on that? Why are you cheaper on that? And break it down and understand it in full detail. Typically, unfortunately, the academic professor, PhD, working in a lab has not done too much of that, and they're not really comfortable doing that. So then we would need two experts, one doing that kind of, why are you cheaper? What's making you cheaper here? What's your validation for that? And the other one doing, why is this number correct? And all of that stuff.
Yeah, that part is so critical because I have looked at decks before where on paper, everything looks right. I mean, the team is phenomenal. I remember one where the two of them were recipients of the Nobel Prize, and the technology was sound. They'd been working on the research for so long. And I sent it to somebody who because I used to work at an energy trader, and he wrote back in 2 minutes and he said, there's absolutely no need for this technology. The process is already incredibly efficient. So those are the types of things that I think we need to be able to engage as much or even more so than the science due diligence.
Yeah, I think it's coupled. I mean, you need to vet, like what you were vetting there, that the team is credible and they are able to do what they're doing first, or at least in combination with the fact that, is there a market for it? Is there a point to it? Is the cost at a point where anyone wants to buy it in any reasonable time? And also, I think what's going to come more, which isn't there like enough, if I would put an investor's hat on, is more exit analysis. Like, how do you actually exit this investment? Is there a timeline for this tech trajectory where you can pay back your LPs? Can you exit this? Is there a way they can prove things before having revenue, before IPOing or whatever? In this kind of heavy slog hardware development space particularly, there isn't, at least we are not tasked too much with that analysis yet, but I think that will be emerging when people maybe start getting nervous of where the exits are and when.
Yeah. I think it's also important to note here, specifically in this, I mean, in DeepSense, if you're a health tech fund, you could use DeepSense, but the conversation today is really mostly focused on the climate side of things. But with climate tech companies and hard tech, most founders have this pivot preventing R&D and CapEx spend. So you really have to get this right in terms of the market and the tech. You don't have the flexibility to be very wrong there.
Yeah, I guess you could a few years ago when the rounds were very large and everything, but now it's tightening up. So yeah, I would certainly agree there. And we, I guess, historically profiled helping VCs with climate tech investments, but we worked with private equity on health drug discovery cases. So it's quite broad now. So I wouldn't box us in there. But yeah, I mean, what you're saying in terms of what you can have $100-200 million SoftBank round a few years ago, and you could pivot and you could change your entire approach. I don't see that happening too much going into the future now, at least in the current atmosphere. So you really need to get it right. Yeah.
Right. So one of the value adds of a venture fund, or any fund really, is the network that we bring potentially. And in fact, investors really pride themselves in their industry and network context that they use. Do you think that there are some funds that might see using an external network like yours as a sign of implying that their network is not so strong?
I could see how you could think that would be a risk, but that's actually, I think it's connected to confidence of the investors, to have the confidence to say we don't know, or we don't know well enough, or like as an individual too. Like, we have, counterintuitively, the funds that we work with that have a appointed head of science or head of technology, someone who has a PhD, super smart person that's ostensibly there to vet the technology, they are the most willing to hire external experts. And it's because they have the confidence and the knowledge that they know what they know and they know what they don't know. So I haven't seen it. You could feel like, okay, then they would say, well, that's your job. You should be doing that. But actually, their job is not that. Their job is to get the job done well.
Mm-hmm, right.
And that usually involves, unless it happens to be within their narrow field of expertise. And, there are some universal geniuses. Like, if Richard Feynman was still around, you could have him as a tech DD person for literally everything. But there are very few of such people. So now, the kind of head of science of a venture capital firm, if they're taking their job seriously, which almost all, I would say all of them are, and they are hiring us more than funds that don't have such people, they know that their job is to get the science vetted, not that they personally have to get the science vetted. And so that involves typically finding experts on their own, or finding someone like us to help them find the experts.
So 2 years ago, when there was a lot of capital directed in this area, it was very easy to raise like a smaller micro fund in climate tech. But now we're seeing a lot of these funds evolve and have more of a sector focus. and really figure out where their partners can be value added. So maybe if one of the partners has 20 years of expertise in ag, then that's what they focus on specifically. So I'm seeing an evolution for sure in away from that sort of that generalist model towards a specific sector focus. Do you see a role for DeepSense to play in helping funds taking a systems level view on the market and which area specifically to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, we do that sometimes to have like a sense. There are trends in VC, especially generalist VC, where for one quarter, everyone's chasing this topic, and another quarter, everyone's chasing this topic.
Yeah.
And I guess people are a little bit tired of that now. And so we do get asked sometimes to give like a perspective on an entire segment. It could be hydrogen. Should we do something in hydrogen? Where? What? At what stage? Or, it could be carbon capture, or like these kind of broad things where there's hundreds of things you can do within that topic. And we would then give a kind of an assessment of through experts, then where is the opportunity? Where is there not much opportunity? Is this like a worthy segment to focus on? I don't think we've ever had a request to find a segment for an investor to focus on. They typically have opinions on that themselves, but we could assess, is it worthwhile adding this or removing this? That would be, that's useful in general. And then we would have several experts kind of surveying the entire space.
And can you work with funds to assess their technology risks at the portfolio level?
Yeah, certainly. We could certainly see their existing portfolio, or if they're trying to add something to their portfolio, how interconnected the risks are. If certain events happen, how much impact would that have across that portfolio, and what's correlated and what isn't correlated? And so are there external factors that would sink their entire portfolio or only impact 20% of it, and what those factors would be? That's something that you kind of do need experts to suss out. But there's also kind of the flip side of that risk. Is there a kind of a reward situation in that? Like if something goes well, do you have something in your portfolio which an entire sector needs? Do you have something upstream of an entire sector? Everyone needs to come to buy from your portfolio company the product they're selling. And you haven't made like a specific play. You haven't chosen a specific company in a sector. You've chosen a company that makes something that, regardless of who wins, they all need to come to that company to buy it. That kind of like opportunity analysis is also it's getting requested more and more. And it's kind of similar, but flip side to the like complete risk analysis.
Got it. So let's talk about on the startup side. How can hardware or hard tech, climate tech startups use you?
Well, they either have gone through TechD many times. They've done startups before. They know the questions investors will ask. Typically, they know the process and they know how to prepare for it very well. And then they might have less need for us. We can vet and verify that we feel like it looks good, or our experts feel like it looks good. So you can kind of get a head start. If you haven't done it many times, it could provide quite a lot of comfort to have experts review how you are, like kind of run through it before it's real time. Test how you would perform in a TechD with investors and with the experts that investors bring to the table, and just not be shocked at potentially terrible results when it's go time, but actually try to prepare yourself, do a dry run, and get recommendations for how you should structure your data room, how you answer the questions, how you present your material, and if there's gaps, help to plug those gaps. If you have critical questions that you don't have an answer for, and you have an ability to go out and get those answers, we could point that out. So it's something we never actually organically thought about. This opportunity. It came to us. We got companies asking us if we could help them prepare for TechDD, and we said, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Why don't we offer that to startups trying to raise, so that at least they can feel quite comfortable? Maybe they're nervous about a lot of stuff they're pitching in their deck, but at least the tech part, they know, not that they're going to sail through it, but they know there's no nasty surprises going to happen at that part if they've already vetted that with experts.
I know for the earlier stage companies, you've done webinars with some of the leading incubators and accelerators on how to set up a data room, which I think is really, really important, because if you're looking at a company and their data room is set up and everything that you could possibly ask for is already there, that's a huge green flag.
It's just gives you so much confidence that they're not trying to, like, they not only are well structured, but they're also not trying to hide something. It's all out there and it's all wants to be seen. It's kind of like the example you used when we put those fusion experts in the room and they were excited and giddy to get to present their, like, that's kind of the version of a well-structured, well-presented, well-filled data room. Is really look at all the amazing stuff we have, rather than, it's very confidential. We don't know if we can show this figure. And yeah, we might, that gives you kind of a negative feedback. Whereas a well-presented, clear, well-filled data room available gives you the opposite. And you're like, okay, this is a very good first impression.
Yeah, one other tip I would recommend to startups is to create a really good and thorough frequently asked questions section. So if you have a data room in Notion and you're pitching to investors, every question that they ask you, you should put that into your Q&A, because most likely the next set of investors are going to ask you the same question. And I think you should do the same if you have a DD session with folks from DeepSense where you're answering the scientific questions. And one, that makes you look incredibly prepared. Two, it saves you a lot of time. And three, it actually makes the investor look pretty silly if they ask you a question that's already answered in the FAQ, because it shows that they didn't do work on their side because the answer is already there. So that's something that I would highly recommend. And I think that startups can use their experience of working with DeepSense scientists to address that part as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the excellent outputs of doing this kind of proactive self-DD is you populate that, maybe not frequently asked questions, but at least asked questions that you can you can answer then ahead of time, and then you plug almost all of those holes and you just look extremely well prepared. They might still do a tech DD, but you're on 80% of the way there proactively before that process even starts with the investor.
So I know that you guys are going to be at the Drop conference, which is a conference in Europe hosted in Malmo, Sweden in September. And you're going to be doing sort of a roundtable on how to do due diligence for a deep tech deal. I know that wait list is like now ridiculous. It's like over 100. So to the extent that people can't get to that roundtable or can't get a seat, you're also releasing an integrated science tech due diligence framework, collaborating with investors, scientists, and industry leaders. So what does that report cover, and when does it come out?
It's coming out very soon, and it's covering at a high level, essentially like a checklist of everything, all the terms, all what you can expect to prepare for and go through in a tech due diligence, the TRL levels, how are they defined, how you motivate what you're doing, what kind of questions are you going to be asked. So it's not extremely long. It sounds like I'm describing a book here. It's not extremely long, but it is comprehensive. It does cover, I hesitate to call it a Bible, but it's a very good reference document to reference as an investor and as a startup. To see, did we do all of this as an investor, and did we prepare for all of this as a startup? The Ripple we're doing at the Drop, so I cannot plug the Drop enough. It's a wonderful meeting. It's a wonderful conference. We're doing a Ripple there. Yes, it's extremely oversubscribed, but we
what
will
does a
try
Ripple
to,
mean?
And I would say,
for people that don't know.
A Ripple is kind of what they call a special event that we have. A DeepSense and World Fund, the venture capital investor World Fund, are co-hosting this Tech DD session. It's kind of limited to 20 people, and there's a lot more people signed up. I would recommend anyone going to the Drop that would like to come to sign up anyway. And then we know that you had an interest in coming, and we will try to arrange something, a webinar or a live event or something for the people who couldn't come as well. So we know that you can kind of signal your interest that you wanted to come, and we'll make sure that everyone who wanted to come gets to maybe a virtual, maybe a real version of what the kind of 20 people that were signed up first got to experience live at the Drop.
Got it. I can add that link in the show notes as well. So final question for you, I guess, to wrap up and summarize everything we've been talking about. How do you feel that working with DeepSense gives deep tech investors an edge?
I think you have a team at your fund that's really the people you like, that are the experts in your field, that you feel are super smart and excellent at what they're doing. And via DeepSense, you've got 2,200 more by your side as needed to deep dive into the tech that you're looking at. And it just gives you kind of an extra weapon in your arsenal that other investors might not have that could be pivotal, especially if it's not kind of a new CRM system, but it's some hardware or software that runs hardware that's going to maybe save the planet, which is deeply technical in nature. You have an army, an arsenal at your side that other people don't have, and it could give you an edge, or should give you an edge. And from like an impact perspective for us, what DeepSense does and why we wanted to do it is it avoids money flowing to the wrong things, and it helps money flow to the right things. And that's really what we're trying to enable. And that's kind of the mission statement of DeepSense.
Yeah. And it's really how this sector is very different from other sectors in venture and private equity, especially if you're an impact fund. You, as an investor, have a moral responsibility to make sure that capital is being directed to the things that could have the greatest impact the quickest. So yeah, that's a very, very important point. And that is it for today's episode of Climate Tech 360. If you found this episode useful, then please subscribe and leave a positive review, as it makes it easier for people to find the podcast. Thank you for listening, and I will catch you at the next one. Bye, everyone.